Hello. Ooh, yay. For a minute there, you were so quiet. I felt a little guilty not being the show. So I'm Jennifer Sender. I'm the producer here in the Greene Space. You are at the first show of our new season. This is the very first. Hooray. It's not even Labor Day, and here we are, back to work. So hopefully you noticed all the new art and fresh paint and fun stuff going on in here. We hope everything's working. If your chair seems wobbly, let us know. I think we're done with all the maintenance projects. Before we get started, this is a great time to turn off all the sound-making devices you may have, cowbells, phones, iPads, etc. If you want to tweet during the show, please be subtle so that you don't distract the people on stage and sitting around you. On the other hand, if you're watching at home right now on our live stream, please join us in the conversation we are having online. We are at the Greene Space on Twitter, and we're using the hashtag InsideLook. So some of you on your way in noticed one thing that wasn't here that should have been, and that is the bar. So as I mentioned, we've been doing some maintenance, and due to a small clerical error, we did not maintain the bartender's schedule. But the good news is on your way out, we will have the bar. So if you want to stick around, we're going to have drinks after the show. So that's the good news. But back to the video. The video of tonight's show will be archived online by tomorrow, so check it out at thegreenspace.org. If you loved what you see tonight, share it with your friends. We live stream all our shows, so if you can't come back in person, you can always see what we're doing online. Later this month, we're mostly sold out, so if you didn't already sign up for the newsletter and get your tickets, you can't come, but we do have tickets still to musicians from the Marlborough Festival on the 28th. That's a WQXR show. In October, we still have tickets for Leonard Lopate's Lopate and Locavore series. Marcus Samuelson, Mangchi, and Mater Jaffrey will be here. And Rick Moody is coming here with his new book in November. So check out all that great fall stuff. Tomorrow night, QXR is sold out tomorrow night. Sorry, guys, but you can watch the webcast of Jamie Barton and the Richard Tucker Award winners. And Chrissy Hind is going to be here on the 24th. So she'll be here with John Schaefer. So those will be some great webcasts. Now, your host tonight is an award-winning radio host and currently the voice of Afternoon Drive on WQXR. He's not just a regular host here in the Greene Space. He has also broadcast from little-known venues like Lincoln Center, Carnegie Hall, and the Hollywood Bowl. Give it up for Elliot Forrest.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. You are in for a treat tonight. Love, loyalty, memory, identity. The new musical Allegiance explores the things that motivate and inspire all of us, while it tells the story of one Japanese-American family's experience during World War II. The show had its world premiere at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego in 2012 and now is headed to Broadway, with previews beginning on October 6th at the beautiful Longacre Theater. Tonight, you'll get an inside look at the production with the stars of Allegiance. She is a Tony Award winner, the original Kim in Miss Saigon, the voice of 2 Disney princesses in the movies, a judge on The Voice in the Philippines, and a recording artist whose albums have sold over 5 million copies worldwide. We are honored to have Lea Salonga with us tonight. He is an actor, singer, and songwriter. You've seen him on Broadway, perhaps the television show Glee. This hometown crowd will appreciate that he's also a graduate of Stuyvesant High School. Give it up for Telly Leung. And finally, please welcome an actor, author, social justice activist, social media star, and the person whose real-life experiences inspired the story of Allegiance. And it almost goes without saying, but I will anyway. We first came to know and love him as the helmsman of the USS Enterprise from the original classic television show Star Trek. Please welcome George Takei. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming here. One of the more unusual things about these inside looks is that we often do them before the show even goes into previews. So I normally, when we do interviews, I love to see the show. That's not even an opportunity here. So we're all going to be exploring it tonight together from the sense that you haven't even started previews yet. George, you mentioned to me backstage, first time on Broadway. Is that right?
This is my debut on Broadway this fall. And I'm on stage with the legendary Lea Salonga, Tony Award winner. And I get to see myself young in this one as well, because Telly is playing me.
Playing you
as
at
very
a
young
different
man.
age. Awesome. I think we all want to come out of here knowing the story, but before we get to the actual musical and the plot and the story of what you tell in this show, let's talk about the real life inspiration. December 7th, 1941, Roosevelt said, "A day that will live in infamy." How did your life change on that day?
Dramatically. And that change shaped my life. I was a child then, but overnight, we were seen as the enemy simply because we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And it's the story of this Japanese-American family that we tell, and how that event put incredible stress on this family, despite the fact that we were tightly bound by love. Love of, sibling love. There's brothers and sisters, as well as father's love for his children, as well as the grandfather's love for his grandchildren. But there's no mother, a motherless family. Essentially, Lea's character serves as the mother and helps raise her brother. So it's a very powerful human story of this one family under these harsh circumstances. But the test of resilience, and these are very resilient people, is the fact that they can find joy under those circumstances and fall in love. It's two love stories, one for each of the siblings. My character, Young, played by Telly, falls in love with a white army nurse, a white woman, interracial love.
This sounds like trouble in 1940s America.
Dangerous love. She falls in love with a young law student who knows the law, who knows the Constitution, and he decides that he is going to take a stand in opposition to that. He becomes a resistor, and she becomes a resistor with him. So it's a powerful love story.
This is something you lived, and I think a lot of people either don't remember this part of the true life part of American history, or don't want to know, or don't want to remember this. But you lived through this.
I did.
You were 5 years old
As a child, yes.
And there was a knock at the door.
There was a knock at the door, and I remember how scary it was. In fact, I saw the soldiers before they knocked at the door. My parents got my younger brother and my baby sister up very early one morning. We're looking out the window, and we saw soldiers with bayonets on their rifle, two of them, marching up our driveway, stomped up the front porch, a fisted pound on the front door.
And let me just interject, you're in California at this point.
I'm a Californian.
Right.
My mother was born in Sacramento. My father was a San Francisco. We're Californians. And with no charges, with no trial, we were rounded up and incarcerated in U.S. internment camps.
How long were you in the camp?
We were taken to the swamps of Arkansas, where we were for about a year and a half. And then we were transferred to another camp in Northern California, right near the Oregon border. And the duration of the war.
Your family had lives and jobs and livelihoods.
Lost everything. My father lost his business. We lost our home. We lost our freedom.
And for a child, was it odd for you, or did you find some childhood in all of that?
I did, because I must say, my real memories are fun memories of a 5-year-old kid, 6-year-old kid, 7-year-old kid. My father prepared us for that trip to Arkansas by telling us that we were going on a long vacation to a place called Arkansas. We were thrilled. Arkansas. It sounded exotic.
I've been to Arkansas. No,
Well,
it's
when
lovely.
when you're a kid, it can be fun. You know, there was a creek. They call it cricks, not creeks, right around our block, and we caught pollywogs there and put them in jars and watched them suddenly spring legs and lose their tail and turn into frogs. You know, it was a fascinating childhood.
Did your family become bitter about all this? How could you avoid that?
Well, the thing is, my father believed in the fundamental ideals of this country, the shining ideals of our founding fathers. And when I became a teenager, I became very curious about my childhood behind those barbed wire fences. And we had some long discussions after dinner. And he explained to me, and this is a man, mind you, who lost everything in the middle of his life, everything that he and my mother worked to get. They lost everything, and yet he was able to define democracy for us as a people's democracy. And it can be as great as a people can be, but also as fallible as people are. And that our democracy is vitally dependent on people who cherish the ideals and actively engage in the process of a democratic government. And then one Sunday afternoon, he said, "Let me show you how it works." And he took me to downtown Los Angeles to the campaign headquarters of Adlai Stevenson for president. My father was a great admirer of Governor Stevenson's. And I saw passionate people who believed in Governor Stevenson. I heard his speeches, and they were inspiring. And I dove in with them. And I saw right in front of me, with flesh and blood, they became my friends, how democracy works. It's people who passionately care about our form of government and commit themselves to making it work right.
I'm seeing a direct connection between your father taking you there and your activism today, it seems.
He shaped me, and I've been involved in many political campaigns ever since then, for governor of California, for our senator, and I lost with all those other campaigns.
But doesn't matter whether you win or lose. You're part of the
But
the
my
campaign.
councilman, city councilman, one of the first African Americans that became a councilman in a major city, Tom Bradley, declared for the mayor of Los Angeles. And my father threw a fundraiser for him in our living room. And I became a volunteer in that campaign. And he asked me to be his Asian American chair for his campaign. And he won at long last. I supported a winning candidate.
So the musical allegiance, it's not so much your life, it's inspired by these.
It's my parents'
right?
experience, yes.
I see. Okay, all right. And how long have you been working on this show?
Well, a while. It's been a while, but every day of that while has been committed to making sure that this makes it to Broadway. It had to be on Broadway because we met the creators in a Broadway theater for 2 nights in a row, but just by coincidence. But I don't think that was a coincidence. It was meant to be. We met our composer, lyricist, and our producer in an off-Broadway theater, seated right in front of us. And we chatted before the show and during the intermission, and we went back to our apartment saying, those are passionate theater lovers, just like us. You know. Then the next night, we went to see In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's a celebrity now. And we walked into the theater, and we had aisle seats, and we saw 2 arms waving at us like this. About in the middle of that aisle were the 2 same guys. And I said to my husband, Brad, isn't that a coincidence? It's the same guys there. And Brad said, I think they're stalking us. And so we met in the theater. Near the end of the first act, there's a powerful song that the Puerto Rican father, sings. It's called Inútil, useless. He feels useless because he loves his daughter, who's very bright and wants to go on to college. And he couldn't do anything to help her. And I don't know how that triggered me, but it reminded me of my father in the Arkansas camp. And I remember the conversation that we had after dinner, how anguished he was. He had three young children, and he felt so helpless and so uncertain about our future and what is going to be happening to his children tomorrow, much less in the future. What kind of life are they going to have? And I started bawling. And then the intermission comes and the lights go blazing on. And I'm quickly wiping the tears off my face, and these two smiling guys come climbing over the knees to chat again.
It's the power of the theater, isn't it?
The power of the theater.
You knew you could do it.
And I told them why that song moved me, and that was the beginning in a Broadway theater. So it has to be on Broadway.
And I guess there was no discussion at that point, after being so moved, that it might be a play instead of a musical.
Well, that was my thought before that. But Jay said, I'm a composer lyricist, and we're musical theater fans too. So when he said a musical would be a wonderful way of heightening the emotions there, and we absolutely agreed with them. But we just knew him from intermission conversations. So, we agreed, and we said, yeah, it's a great idea. They went back to San Francisco. We went back to Los Angeles. But I started a email conversation with Jay, and I invited him to come down to Los Angeles to visit the Japanese American National Museum. I said, you'd be interested in that. I happened to be the chairman of the board then, so they got the chairman to be their personal docent. And they got even more fired up. He went back, and this was about 3 weeks later. He sent a song over titled Allegiance. And there I was at my computer, bawling away again. And that's when I said, he's
the guy.
A musician.
He's the guy.
And we worked together from then on.
Lea, you've been involved in this as well for some time.
Yeah, since the very first reading at the Japanese American National Museum. I can't even remember what year it was. I was asking you today. It was 2009, 2010?
10, I think.
Well, we'll argue about that later. But yeah, from the very first reading, my agent told me that there was this new musical that was being developed. I asked for music to be sent, and then there were, I think, a couple of songs plus a little bit of video that you had done of some preliminary or very early reading of something, and then I'm like, I like this, so let's give this a try. And so for every single reading, workshop, production, lab, I've been involved with the show, and
At
it's
the very
been incredible
beginning.
from the very beginning, pretty much. Yeah.
Was it the story? Was it the music? What touched you most?
I think it was the song. I don't know if it was the story, because what it was back then is very different from what it is now. And the story has become much more compelling, much more streamlined, incredibly emotional. But it's gone through so many changes since that first reading that I almost don't recognize. They're not the same shows anymore, except for one song. There's one song that Jay wrote titled Gaman. And once I said yes to doing the reading, I think that's right around the time he actually wrote the song. He's like, oh, Lea's doing this, so I'll write this for her. And so I've lived with that one song for I don't know how many years, and I think it's one of the only bits of music that has remained from that very first reading to now.
And what does Gaman mean?
It's like resilience under the most trying of circumstances and holding one's dignity high. And that's enduring
with dignity,
endure when
fortitude.
Yeah.
Sounds
That's
like
what
a
everybody in the camp does. Yeah.
major theme, exactly. And Telly, how long have you been involved?
I've been with the project since 2010, I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah, 2010. So that first reading was a year before that.
Right.
Then you're right.
Yeah, 2000.
I win the argument.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just for those of you who go, oh, a new Broadway show is opening, and we're going to go now, and it just opened, and you think, well, they've probably been working on it for a couple of weeks. No, that's not the case. It's years in the
never-
making.
Version, we had a mother.
There was
But
a mother.
yes, but she died.
We'll get to the Disney story later, but they all die in the Disney
They all
stories,
die.
don't they? They're all dead in the Disney stories.
I mean, but just as an example, Lea and I, we've been working on the show since 2010, and she went from being my Japanese teacher to my sister-in-law
I think it was sister-in-law as well as
and Japanese
She's
teacher,
sister-
and now,
yeah.
now we're brother and sister.
like full on brother
Yeah.
and sister. There used to be an older brother, but he's been killed off too.
Mom is died.
Mom's
it's,
dead, and so my character has become my character has become sort of an amalgamation of this Japanese teacher person and the older brother and the mother. And my name was very different at the beginning. It was Gloria. I have a story about that later. There was Gloria, and now it's Keiko. But for short, it's K. There was one night during the world premiere production in San Diego where George, on stage, in performance, called me by my old name.
From a draft 3 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, Gloria, I mean
I
Kay.
don't forget.
That was
Great.
awesome. It was
great.
just...
That was her English name,
That's right.
Gloria Keiko.
That's right.
Well, you guys are in for a treat. We get to hear a song from the show. Tell us what we're going to hear, Telly.
This song, this version of this song, because as you
It's
know,
gonna change
musicals
in, like,
change.
a week.
I'm sure it'll change again. But this version of this song, as of last Friday, is called "What Makes a Man," and it's Sammy's first kind of big song on the show. In the show, Sammy has a conflicted relationship with his father. His father is Issei, which in Japanese means first generation. Sammy is born in America, so he's Nisei, second generation. And when, in our story, which reflects kind of what the community was going through, many of the Issei members, the first generation members, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they dealt with the internment and the situation and the racial tension of it by saying, gaman, endure, bow your head low. Another phrase that we also use in the show is shikata ga nai, nothing can be done, so don't do anything, just let it pass, right? And whereas many American-born Japanese people, the Nisei, were, the minute Pearl Harbor happened, they, like Sammy in the show, runs to enlist. They wanted to do something. So now here's Sammy, who's now in his 20s, bubbling with all this possibility, but then all of a sudden the internment happens, and he's trapped in this place, and him and his father get into a row, and his father goes, make yourself useful. Be a man, make yourself useful, because his definition of a man is to think before act. And for Nisei, for many of the Nisei, it was act. You must do something. We must do something. And so this is What Makes a Man from Allegiance.
Well, if you'll make your way
Sure.
over there, I'll introduce not only the pianist, but the musical director and conductor of Allegiance, Laura Berkowitz.
Make yourself useful. Does he hear himself? Look where we are. Stuck in this wasteland where nothing and no one goes far. One word and I'm 12 years old again. When I challenge him, I'm first to blink. I'm so tired of being told again what to do, what to say, what to think. You must know your place here. Be humble, don't stand up too high. He says, go be helpful, then tells me that I shouldn't try. He'll never understand me. He questions each move that I make. But I won't let him command me. That's my first and last mistake. What makes a man is not what he says. It's the action that he takes. What makes a man is not how he fails, but the record that he breaks. What makes a man is is what he makes of himself while he's giving it all he can. That's what makes a man. I should be out there, far past the fences and wire, so I look like the enemy. So there's no way to climb any higher. Our people will need support now. We're out on our own, make or break. It's no time to come up short now. There is so much more at stake. I'm more than just a number on a beat-up luggage tag, some nameless, faceless body in a crowd. When the world is upside down, find the upside, turn around, and be the kind of man to make him proud. I'll be the kind of man to make me proud. What makes a man is not what he says, it is what he leaves behind. What makes a man is not what he gets, but what he gives back to mankind. What makes a man is what he makes of himself while he's giving it all he can. My soul awakes, I'll do what it takes, and that's what makes a man.
Telly Leung from the new Broadway show Allegiance. Thank you so much. That was awesome. So be specific here. You said this was a new song, new version of this song?
Yeah, actually, this song actually did not even exist in our San Diego world premiere production. Sammy actually didn't have a song. Sammy had one. Yeah, Sammy had a big song at the end of Act 1, and then they decided they went, oh, this is such a great song. They're like, and it's ending Act 1. We're gonna give everybody a little piece of this song. So it ended up not being Sammy's song anymore. So then it was after we came back from San Diego, we did one more what they call a developmental lab in New York City, where we gathered the whole gang again together, and we got into a rehearsal studio, and we really dove into beat by beat this piece. Yeah. And they said, Sammy needs some sort of I want song, it's kind of what is it that he wants, and he wants the appreciation of his father. He wants to be taken seriously as his own man, and to be his own person. And so this song was first written in May 2 years ago, yeah. I think, and it's gone through many drafts since. The last draft being last Friday. So those are brand new lyrics from Friday. So crazy, I know. But that's putting on a new musical. That's kind of the process.
Oh, yeah. There's going to be a lot of changes once, even like during the next few weeks in the rehearsal studio, and then once we start previews, and the preview audiences are going to get all kinds of new stuff that gets thrown out the next day, and it's fun. It's nerve-wracking and it's crazy.
That's why we look forward to the opening.
Yeah.
It freezes the show.
The show's frozen. But it's part of that too. It's part of the process of an original musical. Allegiance is based. Yes, it's based on the events of the internment and George's life and his experiences there, and the experiences of the 120 Japanese Americans that were actually in the camps. But it is an original musical, not based on a book, not based on a movie. It's brand new. So that's why these characters have grown and changed, because we as artists and the creators as artists have the liberty and the freedom to do that.
You grew up here in New York.
I did.
I'm curious, was there a moment where you went, wow, I have a voice, I can really do this?
I went to Stuyvesant High School in New York City, which was a math and science high school. I'm also the son of immigrants. They did not want me to be a poor, starving actor. That was the last thing they wanted me to do. And I remember being in Stuyvesant, getting good grades and studying hard because they encouraged me to, and they wanted me to go to an Ivy League school and become a doctor or a lawyer. Very much Sammy's story in Allegiance as well. And I remember I would save up my allowance money, and I would go see a Broadway show. I would go to the TKTS booth and buy a half-price ticket. And I remember seeing Carol Channing in Hello, Dolly. actually, when that tour stopped by the Lunt-Fontanne and played for about 3 or 4 months. It was on Broadway for a little bit.
That'll change your life.
And I did, and I remembered her singing, "Before the parade passes by." And I said, "Oh, before the parade passes by," I was like, that's my life. You only get one life. I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be doing what Carol's doing, so. That was really kind of the moment. I felt like that was like the aha moment.
And Lea, for you, was there a moment where you went, I need to do this, I can do this?
I don't have that same story. Because I came from a family of artists. I mean, among my cousins are sculptors and a prima ballerina, and there were other cousins that were doing musical theater, so I just kind of stepped in, I guess. And I was 7 years old when I did my very first show in Manila, and I was singing at family parties. And so at one of those parties, maybe I was around 5 or 6 years old, my cousin, who was really active as a musical theater actress, told my mother, there are these auditions for kids. For The King and I, you have to take her. And so my mom did, and I got up there and I sang, and I got the job right then and there, and I've just been working ever since then. So I've been working pretty steadily for the last 37 years. So there was no opposition, but there was emphasis given to my education. And I guess the attitude of my parents was that, okay, you need to have an education because this showbiz thing, it's incredibly fickle, and it still is. You don't know if you're actually going to be a huge success at this, so we want to make sure that you get your college education, yada yada yada. And so I went to university as a pre-med student, which I actually did enjoy. It was I totally had my sights set on becoming a doctor, and then these auditions for Miss Saigon happened in the Philippines, and that kind of changed my life, and that was that.
That was a major turning point for you.
It was a huge turning point, and it was actually not during the auditions that I made the decision, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because even while I was in Miss Saigon, I was like, okay, I'm going to finish out my contract, head home, and continue my life as it was before the auditions even happened. And then there was one Sunday, my mom and I went to church. We were practicing Catholics. Me, not so much anymore. My mom still is, though. But we went to Mass one Sunday, and then the priest, during his homily, said very, very little. And all he said was, each of us has been given a gift by God. Use the gift that God gave you. And then I was like, okay, that must be for me. And then I made that decision. Okay, I'm in this West End show, which is a huge hit. I think this is what I'm meant to do for the rest of my life. I'm not going to go back to university to become a doctor. And then I started the application process for drama schools in the UK. And then I got the call, you're going to Broadway. So to New York I came. And once I got here, it felt like this is home. And that was that.
I think we're glad that it worked out that way.
Yeah, it did.
I want to go back to the show a little bit, because I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the presidential race hadn't started yet, and now we're at the beginning of it, and all of a sudden the term immigrants is at the forefront. Ooh. This must come up in your rehearsal as you start to talk about the immigrant issue in politics now, and as it relates to this play. Have you been talking about that?
Allegiance is very relevant to our times today. The immigrant issue. When Donald Trump says immigrants are rapists and criminals and all that, that is with a broad brush painting all Mexicans. Mexicans who have been here for many generations, and people look at them like that. When 9/11 happened, we've had Arab Americans in this country for many generations, and suddenly they were looked at in the same way. So the fact that Japanese Americans were looked at as the enemy just because Pearl Harbor was bombed and that we happen to look like them is the same lesson. And we've got to learn from history. Unfortunately, this chapter of American history is little known, or if they knew a little bit about it, it's been forgotten. And so in a very entertaining way, we also remind people of how fragile our democracy is.
There's an aspect, like I said, I haven't been able to see the show yet, but you've talked about this a great deal, and tell me if it's in the show. You talk about the 442.
Yes.
Is this a part of the play?
Telly's character is, as he said, right after Pearl Harbor, young Japanese Americans immediately rushed to their draft board to volunteer to fight for this country. That act of patriotism was answered with a slap in the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy non-aliens. I mean, it's outrageous. These young people were doing a very patriotic thing of volunteering to fight for this country, maybe even die for this country. And to be called an enemy is outrageous. But that outrage was compounded by that other word, non-alien. What is that? That's a citizen defined in the negative. They even took the word citizen away from us and put us in behind those barbed wire fences. And that's the story we tell. Young people like Telly's character, Sam. I'm the same character, old, and I'm remembering this story. Were desperate to prove their Americanism. And finally, after a year of imprisonment, the government realizes there's a wartime manpower shortage. And here are all these young people that we labeled enemy non-aliens. How do we tap them? And so in order to justify their tapping young Japanese Americans, they come down with a notorious loyalty questionnaire, very sloppily put together.
Yeah,
There's a
that's
copy
it.
of it.
This
That
is
key
a
question-
copy of that you can find
Number
on the internet. It
27 and
says,
number 28.
Statement of United States, citizen of Japanese ancestry. So explain what this document is.
Well, it asks a series of questions, but the most outrageous question was question 28, which asked, and I'm paraphrasing, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? We're Americans. For the government to assume that just because of these faces, that we have an inborn, organic loyalty to the emperor was outrageous. So if you answered no, I don't have a loyalty to the emperor to forswear, you were also answering no to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? If you answered yes, I do swear my loyalty to the United States, then you were confessing that you had been loyal to the emperor and were now willing to forswear, set that aside, and repledge. And the amazing thing is that thousands of young men bit the bullet, swallowed that bitter taste, and went to fight for this country. But the converse of that are the resistors. And I consider them just as heroic because they stood on principle, took a lot of guts to stand on those principles. And it was a very American act. And for that, for taking that stand, they were tried for draft evasion, found guilty, and sent to federal penitentiaries. It's a chapter of American history that we can't be too proud of.
And the flip side of that is the 442
Yeah.
of the people
442.
who did enlist and go fight.
I mean, there was truly a belief by those that did volunteer to fight in the 442 and to fight in the war, even though they were them and their families were imprisoned in these camps. They felt like if they went and did that, they would prove their loyalty and they would free our families. That was really the belief of these young
End
people.
the war and get 'em out.
Right. That this was going to be that this was the act that was going to help our community be free. And
So this was a combat unit.
this was a combat unit, and
They
actually,
were used like cannon fodder. They were sent out on the most dangerous mission, sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any unit of the entire Second World War, and came back as heroes. The most decorated unit of all of the units of the Second World War. They were greeted back on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." And that's the character that Telly plays, and that's me as an old grizzled veteran who fights in the Korean War and the Vietnam War as well. They weren't, people that were fighting just for that one war. They were dedicated to making sure America prevailed, to make America a better country.
And but these are two very conflicting beliefs between the resistors and the people who felt like it was their patriotic duty to serve. So this really tears our family apart in the show. So, we, in the beginning of Allegiance, we learned that Sam and Kay, this brother and sister, have not spoken for 50 years. That's a lifetime. And you find out through the course of the show that it is this questionnaire that tears not only the community apart, but also this family apart. And then how does this family reconcile that deep wound,
As I was coming in this morning, preparing for this evening, my colleague Brian Lehrer on WNYC had a whole segment on just really sort of talking about a quote Bobby Jindal had given recently, in which he said, immigration without assimilation is an invasion. And it was resonating on all sorts of levels. You're second generation in this country.
I'm third.
Third
My mother was born in Sacramento.
But their parents
Were immigrants.
were immigrants.
My
right.
grandparents.
Same with me, actually. Both my parents were born in Brooklyn. Their parents were born in Eastern Europe. So that immigrant feeling is not that far in my family away either. And so the discussion about assimilation and whether it's more important to hold on to your culture, more important to be a part of America, how does that play out in the play, or maybe even in your own lives?
Well, it plays out in the play and certainly in my life too. But my father wanted to make sure that we had the connection to the cultural, mother country culture. We were sent to Japanese language school every Saturday, and I hated it as a child with a passion. But now I'm very grateful.
Here you are in Los Angeles learning Japanese.
However, the reward for that was summer session in Japan. So it was still education, but it was in Japan. So it was, being in Japan, a foreign country, although my ancestral country. And so my parents were very much focused on education. Education in public school and also language school on Saturdays. And my father was in real estate, and he always emphasized my studying architecture. And I suspect that he had in mind putting out a sign that read, Takei and Son Real Estate Development. I would design the building, and he would develop them. So I went to Berkeley as a architecture student for 2 years as a good son. But after 2 years, I just couldn't take that thought of being in an architect's office. So I came back down to Los Angeles, and I said, Daddy, I want to go to Actors Studio in New York, study there. And my father said, well, that's a respected acting school, but they won't give you a diploma when you finish there. At least your mother and I want you to have that documentation that you're legitimately educated. Here in town in Los Angeles, we have UCLA that has a fine theater arts department. And if you study there, they will give you that if you finish. And I did finish, and I delivered that diploma to him. And you know what the graduation present was? More education. It was a summer session at the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's birthplace. I mean, my father was a very stern man, but he also knew me well.
Very supportive. So let me see, not an architect, not a doctor, not an optometrist. Just saying. Does this concept of assimilation, how did that play out? Your family came from China.
Right, my family's from China. I think with all of the talk of immigration from politicians these days, I think there are many of these politicians. This is a country of immigrants. At the end of the day, unless you were a Native American who was here, you came from somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? And I don't. It's interesting because oftentimes, you can look at You can look at a Broadway stage and see an all Asian company and go foreigners. But this show, what I think this show does so brilliantly is that you see Asian faces on stage and they are American. Mm-hmm. And actually you learn how American they are through the course of 2.5 hours. So yes, you might see a lot of yellow people on stage, right?
Right.
Right, but at the end of the day, you start to go, oh wow, like I don't see their color anymore. I see their love of their country. I see the principles that they fight for. I see their deepest beliefs, how they love being American enough to endure the internment. You know what I mean? Or to go and volunteer for the 442. I mean, hopefully the audience walks out going, oh, I get it.
I
get it. That no matter what your skin color is, no matter what you look like on the outside, no matter where it is that your family did come from, you're American, you know? And I think hopefully that is what the audience walks away with, you know?
This play about Asian and Asian Americans, obviously casting in King and I and different shows. Talk to me about the state of the theater particularly, and maybe movies as well, but in what we used to call colorblind casting, I understand equity now says non-traditional casting. Mm-hmm. If it's not about Asian Americans, is it getting better that you're getting cast in roles that it might not even matter?
I think for me, if it's a show where race is not that additional character, then if you have the goods for that particular part, then you should just get cast in it, and not have to worry about whether the audience will, take that leap with you, because I think at the end of the day they will. Many years ago, I got cast as Eponine in an all Caucasian production of Les Miserables. And
that was a big deal. That was a color
I
barrier.
remember it being a big deal because I remember having sleepless nights thinking, oh my God, I'm like one of the first people of color to be cast as a traditionally Caucasian character. And I did not want Cameron Mackintosh's office to be accused of stunt casting that was just me putting pressure on myself. It wasn't anything that Cameron was putting on me personally or whatever. But I was like, I have to nail that song because I'm sure there is somebody in that audience that is wanting to say, she didn't do it right, you should not have cast her. And so I wanted to nail that song so bad every single day, 8 shows a week, to prove something, to prove that, okay, I have the goods for this role. So they didn't cast me just because, she has a Tony from Miss Saigon. And the thing that made Eponine matter to me was it wasn't just a personal obsession with this role, which I had already had. And I was giving so many hints while I was in Miss Saigon too that I wanted to play that role, but that I had a phone call from my agent at the time saying, I'm submitting you for this other role. I'll say it now because I've done it in cabaret. I'm gonna submit you for Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. And I'm like, all right. And not really thinking anything, not ever having grown up as a minority. There was no baggage. There was no question of, but what if they say no or whatever? I'm like, okay. 10 minutes later, he calls me back and says, they don't want to see you because you're Asian. And I was like, crap, okay. And then not long after that, I get the offer to play Eponine. And so I felt this is karmic. This is like it's come back, and I get the chance to prove something that as long as you have the goods, and if race is not an integral part of the show, then anybody can play whatever role as long as they're right for it. Just not long ago, I'm so sad that he's just passed away now. I mean, a 21-year-old Kyle Jean-Baptiste got to play Jean Valjean on Broadway, and he was about to go into another show when at his untimely death. But if you have the goods, and Les Mis is one of the most perfect shows where if you have the voice, if you have, if you're fit that character, whatever color you are, you should just be able to play it. And that's, so I just felt so happy.
I think it's a matter of trusting the audience. And I think a producer
Yeah.
like Cameron is so great because he was
Yeah.
able to go, I trust that this audience, will sit in a theater for 2.5 hours and suspend their disbelief. That tree is cardboard. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's okay. And like,
Right.
Eponine can be Filipino. And like, it's okay. Like,
Yeah, totally.
Even if she has Caucasian parents, like the audience will suspend their disbelief and she will
It's
be
like,
brilliant.
it's fine.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. And the audience goes with it. Do you know what I mean? I remember seeing Audra McDonald in 110 in the Shade at the Roundabout, and I was like, I didn't think once about her race on stage. She was absolutely brilliant in the role. She was the best person for the role.
As Carrie in Carousel.
Right, in Carrie and
Oh my
Carousel.
And she's in love with Mr. Snow.
Right. And it's completely not a thought.
I can only imagine, and I've looked at IMDb for you, George, the kind of roles you were playing prior to Star Trek. And I'm guessing that there were a lot of sort of stereotypical Asian roles. Was there a discussion with Gene Roddenberry when he cast you as Star Trek about what that meant to have you play this role?
No, this is a futuristic show, and Gene was an idealist. He saw a utopian society 300 years from now. The Starship Enterprise was a metaphor for Starship Earth, and the strength of the starship lay in its diversity coming together. So you saw that in the makeup of the crew. You saw the captain, who was a North American, played by a Canadian. The engineer was a European, played by another Canadian from Vancouver, and an African woman was the communications officer, and an Asian person. But he didn't want to bring in the turbulence of Asia in the 20th century, because it was a series of wars, colonizations, revolutions, and his challenge was to find a name for this character, because every Asian name is nationally specific. Tanaka is Japanese, Wong is Chinese, Kim is Korean, Salonga is Filipino, and this nationalistic infighting was not what he wanted to suggest. And how to find the name that suggests all Asia, Pan-Asia, was his challenge. And he had a map of Asia pinned on his wall, and he was staring at it one day, and he found off the coast of the Philippines the Sulu Sea. And he thought, the waters of a sea touch all shores. And that's how my character came to have that name. So the casting was intentionally diverse, because that was his philosophy. And I believe in casting in current productions, be it movies or film or television, to reflect the American scene, that diversity. But also, because of our history of segregation and separatism, we need to have stories like Allegiance or Porgy and Bess that reflects the American scene, but also reflects American history, because we have to learn from that. And I think that's the important thing of Allegiance. It reflects a chapter of American history that is important for all of us to remember as Americans, and not allow something like that to happen again, despite Donald Trump.
Right.
We have some time to take some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, we have some people who are going to run around. All you need to do is raise your hand if you've got some. And if you don't, I have more. So just quickly, George, if I've done the math right, I guess Star Trek next year will have started
50 years old.
50 years in 1966.
However, for me, it's already 50 years, because we did the pilot in
65.
65.
Did you think when you first put on that uniform that you'd be talking about it 50 years later?
Well, Jimmy Doohan came up to me. We were having a chit-chat off stage. And he said, what do you think of the future of this pilot? Well, this is while we were filming the pilot. And I said, I smell quality with this show. That means we're in trouble. Quality never survives. And I said, we're going to be lucky to get 2 seasons. But Gene Roddenberry decided to start the show with that powerful statement. We are boldly going on a 5-year mission. Well, I was wrong. We lasted 3 seasons. The real enemies were not the Klingons. They were the NBC programming officers.
But movies and everything else. Yes, who do we have? Go. We have some pictures.
Of course we do. Didn't we look young?
I wanted to ask you about this because I'm a big Howard Stern fan.
Oh, my.
Oh, wait, one more time. I don't want to walk on that. Go ahead, say it again.
Oh, my.
And he replayed the other day your first appearance. And at one point asked point blank if you were gay. And of course, at the time, everybody would be denying this, which you did. And then, as I said to your husband, Brad, on the way out, it was nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Anyone who listens to the Howard, I know a lot about you guys from listening.
Oh, my. I really feel absolutely naked in front of you.
But it must feel completely liberating for you to be able to be out and be proud and to see the marriage equality. Did you ever dream that it would really come this far so quickly?
It was an aspiration, but I also was an actor who aspired to keep building a career, and you could not have a career if you were known as gay. Because when I was a teenager, I was actually in love with a heartthrob, a blonde boy next door type named Tab Hunter. I think that some of you seniors remember
who wasn't
who
in love
was.
with Tab Hunter?
I saw every one of his pictures that came out of Warner Brothers Studios. But then a scandal sheet, it was called Confidential, exposed him as being gay. And suddenly he faded. We didn't hear from him again. And that was the lesson for me. I could not have an acting career if I were known publicly as a gay person. And but over the years, the climate started changing, particularly after 1969. That was a very important year for me because, first of all, Star Trek got canceled in '69, but that was also the year of Stonewall. And the equality movement began, gay liberation movement began. And it was making an impact on society. And in 2005, the California state legislature, the entire legislature, passed the marriage equality bill. Massachusetts had marriage equality. They got it in 2003. And the California legislature passed the equality bill. But it needed one more signature, that of the governor, who happened to be a movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And when he campaigned for the governorship, he campaigned by saying, I'm from Hollywood. I've worked with gays and lesbians. Some of my best friends are, the whole rhetoric. And so we thought surely he's going to sign that bill. But his base was the right wing of the Republican Party, and he vetoed it. I was livid. And I thought, you know, the world's changing. And he had the opportunity to make that change real. And so I came out for the first time in 2005. And ever since then, despite my previous belief, my career flowered. And here we are, preparing to go on Broadway with a controversial part of American history with Lea Salonga and Telly as me young. Who knew?
I'm a sucker for a happy ending. Anybody? Came all this way? Nothing on your mind? Did I cover everything?
Nothing else. We don't have anything.
Yes, you can when you go on Telecharge and buy tickets to Allegiance.
Have you been aware of a declining and then growing knowledge of Japanese internment? Because my mom and I, we'd read a book about it a couple of years ago. We were talking about it, and my grandmother was there. She was born in 1941.
Where's the voice coming from?
Over here.
Over here. Yeah, she was like, "What's that? What are you talking about?" And we're like, "Well, Japanese internment." And she's like, "What's that?" And we were like, "You lived through it. How do you not know what it is?" So have you been aware of people not knowing about it and then suddenly knowing about it again?
As a matter of fact, after the San Diego production, I made that discovery. So many younger Japanese Americans, and I mean people younger than 50, from my vantage point, they're young. They came up to me and said, I knew my dad and mom or my grandpa and grandmother were in camp. That's the term, in camp. But that's all I knew because they didn't talk about it. They felt so wounded, so shamed by that they didn't talk about it with their own children. And so that's all they grew up with. Our history books didn't say anything. You know, there was no other access to that information. And they told me they learned about the internment, how harrowing it was, how anguishing it was for them, for his parents and grandparents, for the first time. So the Japanese American community, too, is learning from Allegiance.
We have one down here, Jennifer.
I was curious, sir, how did your family survive? How did your family rebuild their lives after you were 7 years old, after you came out of the camps? Did it take years for you to get back to what you had?
Well, the hostility was still strong. When the gates of the camp opened, we were given a one-way ticket to anywhere in the United States that we wanted to go to, and $25. That was it. Everything was taken from us. We were supposed to build our lives with $25. My parents decided to go back to Los Angeles, but the hostility was keen. And as a matter of fact, I learned about prejudice after I came out from the camp. Our first home was on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. Housing was next to impossible. I remember how horrible, how frightening, terrorizing Skid Row was.
You lived on the street?
No, we had a hotel room on
I
Skid
see.
Row.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And the stench of human urine everywhere. And scary, smelly, ugly people leaning on the wall, you know. And my father's first job was as a dishwasher in a Chinatown restaurant. But because my father was a block manager in both camps that we were in, particularly the older people came to him for help and assistance in finding a place to live and get a job. So he opened an employment office in Little Tokyo and assisted them. But, you know, the kind of jobs that he was able to find for them paid a pittance. Janitor, dishwasher, gardener. And so after he got most of the people employed, he found a dry cleaning shop in East LA. So from an all-Japanese American environment to Skid Row to an all-Mexican American environment. And yo puedo hablar español por esa razón. I speak Spanish. But then, and I'm still astounded by it. They worked long, hard, killing hours. But in 4 years, they got enough capital together to buy a 3-bedroom home in the former district of Los Angeles, the Mid-Wilshire district that we lived in. And that became where, you know, we went to junior high school, and so forth. It was amazing what my father had a good sense of business timing. Japanese Americans were getting back on their feet by that time, and he switched to real estate. And so they bought homes and businesses from him, and became very successful.
Time for a couple of more, if we have them. Yes, right over here, Jennifer. Right in front of you, yeah.
Hi. Did the government ever apologize or compensated the people that were interned?
It was a long, long struggle, but in the 70s, the movement began in the Japanese American community to get an apology and redress for the incarceration. And the Congress formed a congressional commission to get more information on the internment. And I testified at that congressional hearing together with others. And in 1988, President Reagan, signed the Civil Liberties Act and formally and officially, on behalf of the government and the people of the United States, apologized for that incarceration and pledged a $20,000 redress. I mean, that was just a token of what we lost, but it was a token. I mean, it was a money. And when I got that check, it was signed by President George H.W. Bush, and I donated the whole thing to the Japanese American National Museum, which tells that story. I felt, as a child, I really didn't experience the internment as my parents did, and I thought the best place for that money to go was the museum that tells that story. And that museum has contributed to Allegiance becoming a reality, and because they all visited the museum and they learned from it, as well as the creators of the show. And what we did was, we in order to put it on Broadway, it costs a lot of money, and we gathered a lot of investors, but we also took advantage of social media. There's this thing called crowdfunding. And so we had a campaign to raise money for Allegiance via crowdfunding. And and this was all voluntary contributions. There were no rewards given out for that. However, when Allegiance breaks even and starts making money, profits, that amount of money, we raised something like $450,000 with crowdfunding. That amount, whatever profit that amount earns, goes to an endowment called the Allegiance Endowment for the Japanese American National Museum. So it's a symbiotic relationship we have.
We've got time for one more. This young lady over here.
So when you got out of camp, when you went to school, were you excited to get out of that camp?
Who are you? Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
When I started school after camp, I had a teacher, and I'll name her, Mrs. Rugen, who kept referring to me as a Jap boy. It hurt. I was a little kid, and what had I done to that teacher? As an adult, though, thinking back, maybe she had a son or a husband in the Pacific Theater and lost them. But I'm still her student, and I'm a kid. And why she had to call me that epithet, and she never called on me when I raised my hand. So I quit raising my hand. I knew she hated me, and I hated her right back. Her name is Mrs. Rugen.
You've talked so...
We'll never forget it now either.
No, you better not.
Wow. Wait, let me take a note. Don't cross George Takei.
Yes.
You've talked so glowingly about your father. Did your parents get to see your success?
Well, because my father introduced me to the electoral process. When Tom Bradley became the first African-American mayor of Los Angeles, and the only African-American mayor of Los Angeles, and the only mayor to serve 5 terms, 20 years, enormously successful mayor. There was a vacancy in the city council seat that he vacated. And my political friends came to me and said, George, you have name identity. You should run for this because it's a one-shot election. So I ran for that office. And I think my father was the proudest volunteer we had in our campaign headquarters. Alas, I was leading until about 9 o'clock on election night. But then a few other precincts came in, and I lost by a heartbreaking 3%. But also, when I did Star Trek, NBC threatened canceling Star Trek after the second season. And fans started a letter writing campaign to save Star Trek. You're nodding. Thank you very much. We appreciate. Live long and prosper. And because of your letter writing, they gave us a third season. And one of the letter writers was my father. I was so touched by that. So yes, my father lived to see some of my success. 2 months ago, the marquee went up over the Longacre Theater, and it was a thrill to see it going up there. But the little poignance I felt that morning was, I wish my parents, and especially my father, could have been there to see that marquee go up.
Well, the good news is we all get to see it. The show will open in previews on October 6th at the Longacre Theater. Tickets are on sale now. I'm Elliot Forrest. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank everybody for watching online. I hope you join us again in the Greene Space. Please join me in thanking once again Telly Leung, Lea Salonga, and George Takei.